Welcome to another episode of For the Players. I am one of your three hosts, this triumvirate of hosts that you have here representing Proxima Studios. My name is Kyle Murdoch, work as the lead audio designer for Proxima. I am joined by, as usual, by my co-host, the founder of Proxima, the head of the studio, the game director himself, Harvey Newman. Insert applause. Right. And today, before we get into our regular, this is very, very different. For those of you who have been watching the first few episodes of the show, it's usually just been us talking. But we are joined by our first outside, but not really truly outside because he has ties, as you'll hear, to the other hosts on the show. Our first guest, Mr. Tim Campbell. How you all doing? First and foremost, I always start with, how's everyone doing? And you can be, doesn't have to just be the shoot the shit. Hey, I'm good. Like, how is it really going? Because right now it's crazy. It's December. It's almost the end of the year. Shopping, holidays, all that jazz,
It's snowing outside. It's actually Yeah, well, it was snowing last night and now it's still, I think it's about to snow today at some point. I don't know, maybe it's snowing now. Again. Yeah, and the cars here are not ready for this. Like you can see cars sliding all over the place. It's crazy.
So in Edinburgh, because that's where you all three are, it's not only, in the States we have, it's, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. It's always, is it not only a white Christmas always, because it seems like that's a place which like always has like wintry weather, but based on every time I talk or we do the show, Chad, you're always like, oh, it's so dark. So it's a dark white Christmas, if that makes sense. It's messy.
It's windy and sideways rain in your face.
Yuck. Why are you all there? Well, I know why you're there, but, come on.
Sometimes I ask myself the same.
Okay.
Right. Well, you get the opposite in the summer. Like the sun will stay out till like 10:30, 11 o'clock. It's like
at night. What?
Yeah, because we're really, really north. So
that's true.
I used to sometimes when I was working more of the straight gig at Build a Rocket Boy, I would come home at like 5 o'clock, and I live on a golf course, and I could tee off at like 5, 6 o'clock, finish at like, if it's a slow round, like 10 o'clock, 10:30, and there's still sun out. And I'm like having a beer at like, 10, 11 o'clock at night, watching the sun go down.
That is amazing. That actually sounds really awesome to hear, because sometimes it's nothing like when you see the sun going down. That's usually the cue for a lot of people. Most of us diurnal people who sleep during the night. When you see that the sun going down, it's the cue like to shut it down. But if it's if it's still out, you can get things done.
It's dangerous. Yeah, it's dangerous.
It's dangerous. This is not a Nat Geo podcast. This is about video games and kind of giving you an inside look of what we do specifically at Proxima, and which obviously pertains to the bigger industry. And before we deep dive into Tim's history and how you all know Tim, I want to ask you all, what did you play over the weekend, like since we last talked? So we'll start with Tim because I feel he's our guest, so we'll go first with Tim.
So I finished my second playthrough of Baldur's Gate 3 on Tactician.
Wow, second playthrough, massive respect.
And I did the Tactician, so I did the hard setting.
Wow.
So that was, and it's interesting. Like I read somebody saying that you need to play it 18 times straight through to experience all the content. And when I did my second playthrough, I totally see what they mean, because like there was this like big dragon fight that happens under the city. That's like it's I would say the second most difficult fight to the end fight for me anyway. It was, and like I totally blew through it and just missed it the first playthrough. Like so
wow,
it was pretty nuts. And then I tried to play Starfield, but the problem I'm having with Starfield is. I get motion sick from it, and then I went online and saw like it's a thing. Like there's a whole bunch of people. It has to do with the field of view and the flicker and all this stuff, and like you have to tweak all these settings or whatever. But like I can't play for very long before I want to I get just seriously motion ill and I have to stop.
Wow. So, as if they didn't have enough problems as it is.
Yeah. But like I was sort of like. I've always had this problem. Oddly enough, it's kind of funny. I work in video games. Like I've like when I was in business development at Atari and I had to evaluate first-person shooters, I could sit and play a shooter, but if I had to stand behind somebody and watch them play a shooter, I would get motion sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have to be real careful, but usually I'm fine. But for some reason, I was getting really motion sick from Starfield, and I was just like, "Oh, am I like regressing and going back to those days?" And then I looked online, like, no, it's a thing. Like, look it up.
Wow.
Starfield motion sickness.
Wow.
The only VR experience I had is like when I was working in Germany at GameForge, the founder got like an Oculus kit, and I put it on, and at the time, it depends on the game. Like in the early ones where there was lots of camera movement and what have you, I would get sick pretty quickly. But I know like I haven't played like a more recent, like as people have like learned how to do VR games like the right way. I haven't tried any of that stuff. I just haven't had access to a kit, and I've never bought one. So I don't know, but I did have some bad episodes with some early stuff where there's like a lot of, head movement as they were experimenting, kind of in VR stuff.
It can be disorienting. You see all these YouTube videos of people who will forget the depth and feel, and like they'll walk into walls and stuff. I mean, I let my mom. I remember, God, this is embarrassing. I'm even saying this, but 2 years ago we got an Oculus for Christmas, a Quest or whatever. And I let my mom put it on, and she got really scared because it was one of the ones where you were on a cliff looking over. And I guess it was so real to her. She was like really like panicking. And at first we were laughing until my daughter was like, Nana looks like she's about to like pass out. And I was like, oh shoot, let me take this off. And I took it off. She was like, I don't ever want to do that again. She was like, why would you do this to me? Like, yeah, it was bad. I love you, Mom, but I'm sorry. It was funny. It was funny initially until and also just a testament of how,
so you got to traumatize your parent,
yeah,
right? After years of traumatizing you. That's cool.
Yeah, there you go. But it was one of those things where, and after she took it off, she was like, wow, this is very different than the games you used to play, like Mario and Zelda. I was like, yeah. I was like, but they're making 3D versions of these too. So she was like, you can have it. Keep it. So anyway. Harvey.
Nice one. Yeah, no, I'm actually, so 2 games that I'm playing right now. I'm still trying to actually beat Zelda's ending. Ganon is still getting the best of me. I'm trying to teach my daughter resilience, and this is not on purpose. so I'm trying to tell her, like, you need to keep playing until you beat it. Like, can we play something else? No, we have to play. We have to continue playing. So this is what I'm trying to do. But also, I'm playing Dave the Diver. Okay. And also I'm playing Cocoon. And these 2 games have a really amazing core game loop that is incredibly addictive. So if you guys haven't played it, play it, because I don't know, like I'm trying to figure out exactly what makes this game so addictive, but going diving for fish and then putting in your sushi restaurant and serving it to customers and getting money and then going back and doing it again feels so satisfying in that game. It's so cool. and Cocoon is like, it feels like a game made by wizards. I still can quite comprehend and wrap my brain about how they actually made the tech of that game work so seamlessly. It's insane. It's really good. Whoever the engineers are for the game Cocoon, they deserve a massive raise and a pat in the back, because wow, it's amazing.
Wow.
Play it if you can.
Okay. Awesome. I'm still behind. Still trying to finish. I realized, like, especially during Black Friday / Cyber Monday, you get bombarded everywhere. So of course, when I turned on my PlayStation, they were like, "Don't miss out on these deals, like 90% off games." And I was like, "Oh, there's a lot of stuff that came out that I didn't own." And one of the things that popped up, I was about to buy Assassin's Creed Mirage, and I realized I hadn't done the Assassin's Creed Valhalla, any of the DLC. So I went and got the Ragnarok stuff. So I'm going through that. And then I actually went back to a buddy of mine told me to go play the game Returnal for PlayStation. That came out a couple years ago. It was really good because he was like, "Oh, you like Dead Space and games like that? Like, you will really appreciate this." So I'm playing that. And last but not least, I did buy the Miles Morales, the new Spider-Man. So I will get to that too. So at this pace, when you finish it and Spider-Man 3 come out, I'll be ready to talk about me playing Spider-Man 2 at this pace. the one that's going to be the game of the year, most likely, it seems. Well, I guess
be
maybe
Baldur's
Baldur's Gate will probably beat it, but I don't know. See, those seem to be the top two, you know?
Yeah. Like, it's a great year for
I
game.
played about 110 hours of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It's the only Assassin's Creed game I've really done and finished.
It's amazing. That's
my
my
son
favorite.
gives me shit because he's a huge Assassin's Creed like aficionado, and he's just like,
Right.
Dad, that's not a real Assassin's Creed game.
Why? Oh, but why?
I don't know,
Because
we'd
it's
have
a
to-
Viking? Like, I don't understand. Like,
Viking, he says it's not stealthy. It's like, RPG.
you can play stealthy.
I look, I thought it was awesome. And then I tried to go back in time and I just couldn't do it because Valhalla looks so good and
right?
felt great where you're climbing up to those like parts with all the
Oh,
doves
my
and then
God.
you jump off. Like, I love those bits. Yeah.
No,
I went and
I've
did
loved
everything in that game. I unlocked the whole map. I got Excalibur. I love that game.
it. Wow.
Wow.
No, yeah, I love it, and I actually like it. Kind of remind me of Ghost of Tsushima in the sense of you can enter a village and either raid it, which I love when you pull out that horn and blow, and your people come out and start raiding, or you really can do stuff. It's just like Odyssey and Origins. I feel
don't know
like
what
that.
he's talking about, but he's a purist, man. It wasn't Assassin's Creed in his mind.
Well, I like it, and I've been playing them since 2007. I played every one that's
I got
come
into
out,
it because I
so.
love the show Vikings, and I played
okay.
a female Aloy just because I love Catherine Winnick. She's my favorite
Oh,
character,
man.
and
She's great.
in,
I love
in
that show.
Vikings, like
Yeah.
Lagatha. So yeah,
Lagatha, yeah, she's great.
Yeah,
in
so
that.
did you play a female? You played a female Eivor. Nice.
Eivor, yeah.
Yep. Cool. Well, you know what? Let's dive in now. You know that we talked about what we're playing and talk about even your backstory and how you got into games. I asked you this offline before we started recording, Tim, but I'm so interested. I looked down at your education and I have to start off asking the question that how does a guy who went to Rutgers, and not about Rutgers because Rutgers is a great school, but more or less what you majored in chemistry, how does that translate into what you do now in gaming? I'm just or
It's
not.
interesting. It does. It actually,
Okay.
I think, dovetails nicely, but it wasn't a plan. It was an accident. So it really all started that, I did pretty well in high school. I was third in my class, but and I'm into everything. Like I was in the marching band, I did, liked all my classes, but I never owned a computer. I had a typewriter back in those days. So I was a pretty lazy writer because I didn't like editing, right, on a typewriter because I'd have to retype a page and take out white out and like paint over it and type it perfectly, or I had to retype the whole page, right? So I kind of was in high school really pushed hard toward, well, you're good at STEM, math and science is for you. You're not so good at the English and stuff, right? So I started really emphasizing, math and science, right? So actually when I got into, I had two choices when I applied for college. I ended up getting a full scholarship at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York, which is like a really prestigious engineering school. And I went there and it was like the guy-girl ratio on campus is like 18-1, right?
Oh, in favor of guys. Yeah.
In favor of guys, right? And this was back in I graduated high school in 1989, right? So there wasn't a lot of, females going into STEM, programs as there are now. I hear that's gone way, way up. And they would talk about how they did all these Ithaca College was nearby, and that was had a much better, ratio between men and women. And they were like, oh yeah, we do a lot of stuff with Ithaca, so you can meet, people of the opposite gender over there. And I was like, okay, yeah. And then the last band that played on campus is Iron Maiden, right? Which, I like metal, but I'm not like a metal head, right? So I'm just going up there and I'm just like, well, I don't really see this as being my social atmosphere, my people, and it's an impressive school. At the time, they were the only school in America that had an undergraduate clean room, for chip making and stuff. So it was a really impressive school. And my parents were, of course, I had a full ride there, full scholarship, room and board, and a stipend. And my parents were like, yes, Rensselaer, and I just didn't. At that point, I was like, I just don't know if I want to be hardcore engineering. Like, I just don't know if I'm cut out for it. And then the social stuff. So at that point, my only other option was to go to Rutgers, which is the State University of New Jersey. And so, like, that was the only other school my family was like, could afford at the time. And I got some scholarships to go there. And I just reasoned that it was a big school. There's a lot of variety. So, I went there and I started out in the engineering program. So I was a chemical engineer. And, a couple years in, I was doing really well. I had great grades, but I love science. I love what I got, the education and what it did for my mind and the exposure. But I'm kind of like, I love science this way. And when I started to realize I was going to have to pick a field within like chemical engineering and get like really focused down, I just wasn't that guy. I wasn't like reading the latest research and wanting to like, sign up for, programs to like support research and stuff like that. It's just like wasn't where my heart was. What I was doing all the time was like I hooked up with these film courses because I didn't really know that you could study filmmaking like seriously at college. And I was like, oh, cool. And there was this professor there named John Belton who was a big inspiration in my life. And he did a lot of like cinema studies. And he's like, a really well-known scholar in terms of cinema studies and film history and stuff. But then he did the first ever like screenwriting class as an undergraduate class. And I took that class, right? And I just started getting into film. Now, I couldn't major in film, but I could minor in cinema studies there. So what I did is I shifted from chemical engineering to chemistry liberal arts, because like at Rutgers, for some reason, you get a Bachelor of Arts in chemistry, not a Bachelor of Science in chemistry. And that gave me the room that I could also like major in cinema studies. And I remember like when I tried to switch, the dean of the engineering school like called me into his office and was just like, why are you doing this? You're doing really well. You've got really good grades. And I'm like,
right.
Yeah, my heart's just not in it. And he's just like, nah, man, we need you to stick around and stick this through. And I'm just like, yeah, nah, dude, it's not going to happen, And so I switched over and, I was just spending all my time making Super 8mm films, like writing scripts. And then I got the crazy idea that, well, maybe I could go to film school now, and John Belton got me an internship working with Martin Scorsese in New York. So I was working at Kappa Productions in New York, and I was just living and breathing and drinking up all this film stuff. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply to the top 5 film schools in America. And if I get into one, then maybe like I can convince my parents to like let me go, because they were just like having none of it. They were like, what? You want to go do what? You want to go make films? Now, like, we started out at engineering at Rensselaer. Like, what are you doing? You're throwing your life away, kind of thing. So I applied to, Columbia, the American Film Institute, USC, UCLA, and I think the University of Iowa, because they actually had a pretty good filmmaking program. And I got waitlisted at Columbia, but I got into USC. Which,
nice.
The USC School of Cinema Television at the time was, I went to the Steven Spielberg building, and it was great. So I got the opportunity. I got some student loans and I packed up and I went to California and I got a screenwriting degree. Now, the cool thing about it, though, is that, during my journey at film school, I learned a lot. I loved what I did there. I loved writing. I took legal classes. I took economics classes. Like a lot of my colleagues at school there only wanted to do the creative stuff and thought all the other stuff was a waste. But I like my liberal arts stuff. Like we had a great Brooke Wharton legal class, like learned all about copyrights and the WGA agreement. And, I found all that stuff fascinating. Took an economics course with Art Murphy, who pretty much invented like box office reporting and Variety. And like, I drank all that stuff up, right? Well, that was really fortunate that I did because of what I do now. Because when I had another inflection point where, you know, I was meeting, like looking at like swimming. Have you ever seen the movie Swimming with Sharks? You should see it if you've never seen it. It's like Kevin Spacey plays this like crazy agent, and it's all about this like kid who's like working for him as his assistant, and he gets like, you know, brutalized, right? And
Okay.
I kind of had some like uncomfortable experiences early on in my foray into Hollywood, and I was just like, man, I just don't think this is my crowd, right? You know, I don't have like relatives in the business, or, you know, I think to be successful in Hollywood and not be traumatized, I think you've got to have some people who are looking out for you, you know, whether it be an agent or a manager or someone who's in the business and can like help steer you out of like, you know, places where you can get seriously harmed mentally or physically, right? You know, and I just didn't have that. And I had some really kind of like, you know, experiences that kind of like, this ain't the place for me. And I had a buddy from high school who was in Silicon Valley working at a game developer. And he was like, oh man, you should come up here and interview for an associate producer job at this developer I'm working at. So I flew up there and I interviewed, and they wanted to hire me, and they liked the fact that I had this like filmic background because they were doing a movie monster game for Virgin, right? Which was a publisher at the time. I was like, this is great. So I go to like move up there, and then I learned the first rule of the video game industry. It's very volatile, because I showed up to go sign. I showed up on a Monday and I saw them. They're like, yeah, come back on Friday and we'll have a contract for you. And when I came back on Friday, the studio director sat me down and said, I got some bad news for you, kid. Virgin canceled our project. There's no job for you.
After you had already, wow.
I moved to the Bay Area. I was in a studio apartment in Palo Alto. I freaking knew. The only other guy was my buddy I knew in high school. Like, I was getting married at the time. It was just like awful. So what I ended up doing for the next year is I waited tables at California Pizza Kitchen, and then shortly after that, I became a valet and bellman at this hotel called the Garden Court Hotel in Palo Alto, and I worked there for like, you know, a year and a half, right? Just
what were you doing
cars.
Meanwhile? What were you doing? You were just like sending out resumes, still trying to
sending out resumes.
Okay.
I did get a little bit of contract work for a time. I ended up working for this. At the time in Silicon Valley, there was like, you know, tech companies, game companies, and then there was this thing called CD-ROM multimedia. And if you remember the game Myst, like,
oh yes,
people thought Myst was like going to be a genre. So there were like these interactive CD-ROM experiences where you'd get like novels with hyperlinked text and stuff. So I ended up getting a job for this little company up there called Halcom Associates, and we were doing an interactive curriculum for Encyclopedia Britannica, and you know, some
that
other
sounds
projects
very
like
exciting.
that. Yeah, well, the cool reason why I got that gig though is because I knew how to use the Avid Media Composer, because I learned how to cut video on it.
Oh wow!
And my job there was I was cutting and then ultimately crunching, you know, video clips that you'd get off like VHS or, you know, those big videotapes that I forget that you were getting higher fidelity like news organizations used. And I was like getting that video and trying to get it to run on like a RAID drive. RAID drives are like this brand new thing, and I was like the only one who had one, but had to get all that to work on like a 386 processor back in the day. So like we literally couldn't get it like the frame rate down enough where it wasn't crashing the app, which was in Macromedia Director. So then I was going into Cosa After Effects. This is before Adobe bought After Effects. And I was like, if there was like a sky, there were all these like gradients of blue, and I was just like washing them out to like one color of blue, right? So the video would like, you know, compress and run. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. So
Holy cow.
It was a great experience, but that was like, you know, I was on the project for like 3 or 4 months and then cut loose and, you know, had to go, you know, finding something again. Meanwhile, I'm like, you know, parking cars and waiting tables to just like, you know, make ends meet, you know.
What did your parents think about, like, at that point? Were they just like, see, should have stuck
Well,
to?
they and myself, it's like, oh my God, what have I done? You know, I
Right.
remember my grandmother who she never called me. I would always have to call her. We had a very close
Oh
relationship.
boy, when you get the call from grandma, okay.
But she would call me up and she's like, and this is, you know, she's from Boston, you know, Boston Irish. And she'd be like, when are you going to stop wasting your life out there in California? And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know, Grandma. You just got to trust that I know what I'm doing, right? And then I got lucky one day. I saw an ad in the Palo Alto Weekly, which is like this like newspaper in Palo Alto, California. And I'm flipping through it, and there's like this woman had put an ad in there saying she was looking for an assistant to do like video game licensing stuff. And it turns out she had this big job at Sega, working on Genesis. Like she was in charge of like all like the intellectual property licensing relationships at Sega. And she had like kind of transitioned to like work from home and like hired me, you know, to like help her out, you know, and it was like me and her and then one other person came on. I worked there for a good while, and we had a client. He was an amateur golfer at Stanford University named Tiger Woods.
Wow.
And you met him?
I never met Tiger, but I
okay.
worked, you know, with his people, and we brokered the company. I helped brokered the deal with Electronic Arts to do Tiger Woods golf, and started that whole thing. Yeah. And that was like postgraduate education for me, because I got to learn this like thing about like intellectual property rights and then pitching publishers. And there were 13 publishers at the time that bid for the rights for the Tiger Woods. And EA didn't even have like the number one game in golf at the time. Sierra did. Mm-hmm. And it was like fiercely competitive. And then, you know, we helped broker that deal and set that up. And then as a result, we got a lot of work either looking for intellectual property rights for publishers or representing brands into publishers. So like, for example, you know, Activision, I worked for Activision for a bit as a consultant, and, you know, I came up with the idea to use the Soldier of Fortune license for the Soldier of Fortune game.
Nice.
You know, because they were looking for different stuff, and Soldier of Fortune was a client of ours, actually. It had just become a show. It was Jerry Bruckheimer's first foray into television was to do this Soldier of Fortune show. I think it was Michael Dudikoff was the star the first year. The second year, Dennis Rodman was the star of the show. You can go look this up, right?
That must have been interesting.
And so when I first pitched the producer at Activision, they're like, you want to do, and this was Raven's game, right? And they were like, you want to do what? And I'm like, no, dude. Don't look at the TV show. We have the underlying magazine rights, and that's
right.
like fits the vibe that you're looking for, because, you know, the Bruckheimer company was really smart. When they licensed things for the show, they would make sure they locked up all the rights. So we didn't just have the rights to all the IP in the show. There were the rights to the IP to the magazine. And when Activision, you know, saw that, they were like, oh yeah, this is really cool. And it kind of fit the vibe. And then, yeah, that was a historic, you know, thing, and that franchise carried on. So I sort of had a knack for like listening to creatives, figuring out like what like they were looking for that really that was authentic for what they were doing, and then going and talking to business people and trying to, you know, set up arrangements. So, and that's really what I've done my whole career, is I've been able to move from like the studio environment to the boardroom and back, right? And bridge the gap between those two worlds, between business and game makers.
Wow.
But that's where it all started. That's how I learned how to do it, was doing that. And then eventually I left that to go work for Atari Infogram and started in licensing, and then worked my way to biz dev and then production, and yeah.
How did you meet these two?
Yeah,
and what can you tell me about these two gentlemen that they would never tell?
You know everything.
So let's see.
You know everything.
I remember meeting the first time I met Harvey quite well, because I remember walking him around the city, and we went up to the Edinburgh Castle, and then we eventually ended up at the Arcade Whiskey and Haggis, where
yes.
You know, because we did this thing. We made Harvey eat haggis on his first trip to Edinburgh.
Oh,
so.
my God.
It's true. It was great. It was glorious. It was
and
great.
he got the whiskey sauce option, as I recall.
I did, because we talked a lot about basketball, and I was very, very impressed with how much basketball knowledge Tim has. He's a avid Celtics fan, or he used to be.
Huge Celtics fan.
And he schooled me on. I thought I knew a lot about basketball. No, not really.
Wow.
So
I was also a sports broadcaster when I was in college. That's one of the things I did when I was in undergrad at Rutgers. I joined the radio station, and I did it because I wanted to have my own radio show where I could like play records I liked and talk to people, talk about them and stuff.
So you did play-by-play or color commentary?
No, I didn't do
or both?
play-by-play, but like I had to join another department if I wanted to have my own radio show.
Right.
So I joined the sports department, and I ended up getting to do color commentary. So
nice.
I worked with this guy, Brian Reagan, who was a really gifted play-by-play guy, and then I was doing color to try to bring analysis and give him a break because, you know, when you're doing play-by-play on the radio, it's like you're doing a lot of talking.
Yes.
And then I would also, when I didn't go on the road a lot, so when I wasn't on the road, I'd be back in the studio and I'd do the halftime stuff to, again, give those guys a break. So, yeah, that was cool.
Wow, man.
I did once, though, when I went back to an E3 a few years ago, I was at the game in, Staples Center when Kendrick Perkins, like, fell and broke his leg, where it was, like, neck and neck. You know, and it looked like the Celtics might actually like pull off another shocker.
Oh, this is the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce era.
Yeah, so it was the second
Three.
time around. Like they had won the championship the year before, and this was them in the finals. And it's the only time I've ever been to a finals game in person, which was a real treat. You know, I had an extra free night when I was at E3, and I was just like, I went to a reseller, and I'm like, I can get a ticket. I could go to the game tonight and see the Celtics play LA, and I got to do that, right? So I did, and again, I was keeping a low profile, but like all the people around me started to figure it out, right? And they were all just like, "Yo, you a Celtic fan?" And I'm just like, "Yeah," but I was being respectful. I wasn't, you know. And then, like, when Kendrick Perkins went down, he broke his leg, like, in the game, like, brutally, you know. And then, like, the game just, you know, it was kind of tight up to that point, and then when he went down, you know, like Kobe took over, and it was just it was over. They all started to actually have some empathy for me, you know, because they were just like, "You guys are warriors," you know. I'm like, Laker fans being nice, you know. It's like, yeah. So it was kind of nice in the end, but I was a little scared going because I was like all by myself, and I'm just like,
you would just take a sip of your beer every time the Celtics would score, like.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of,
I was there in spirit, but you know, yeah. I wish,
funny.
you know, it's like, you know, it was so tight, and you know, who knows, the Lakers. It's just sad when like something like that happens, and like, you know, it's like they just kind of steamrolled after that. But you know, it was great. I love getting to see them in person, and Paul Pierce is like one of my heroes. Love that guy. The truth.
So I don't want to turn this into a sports show, but are you a Patriots fan? And especially this year?
I mean, you know, I was, but I mean, you got here's the thing. Here's the thing. When I grew up as a kid, it was rough.
Oh yeah, I'm a Bears fan, so I know it was rough.
When William Refrigerator Perry ran in that touchdown, like the next day at school, I just got brutalized. Or like when the Bill Buckner incident, I was in high school when Bill Buckner, they lost to the Mets, and I went to high school in New Jersey, right? So the whole school is either full of Yankee fans, you know, who all become fair weather Met fans.
Right.
Right? And it's like, what are you going to do? Cry like Calvin Schiraldi? Yeah, dude. That was brutal. It was brutal for years, and now we're the evil empire because like Patriots are winners and Celtics have come back and, you know, shown good teams, and the Red Sox have now won some World Series. So like now all of a sudden Boston's the town. But when I grew up, we were like the underdog. You know, people love to make jokes. So anyhow, I was the studio head for a company called Build a Rocket Boy, and we had the good fortune of recruiting Harvey out of DICE in Sweden, I think, at the time, if I remember correctly. And yeah, so we met on his on-site, in-person interview at Meet Haggis. So that's what we did.
Yeah, exactly.
That was part of joining.
Nice. That was part of joining.
We didn't have to, but we just took him to a place that's their specialty, and you know he was down for it. So
And
Nice.
how can you say no to a company after that? Especially with Team's charm and stuff. I was like, man, this company is gonna be
He took you
amazing.
to a barcade
So,
in Scotland. That's awesome, dude.
see, that's what I mean. Like, Team is good at his job. He's really
Right.
good.
Okay. Man, I love just, hearing about how global the impact not only of games but everyone's like stories and stuff are, and how you can go from chemistry to working in games to
I
what do
know.
you do now at the company you're at now,
So
Tim?
I'm a principal at a boutique strategic and M&A advisory called Strategic Alternatives.
Okay.
It was founded back in the late 90s, early 2000s by a guy named Bob Wallace. He's pretty much a legend in the games industry. I met him like literally just before he kind of started this company. He was the chief strategy officer at a studio called Ensemble. They made a game called Age of Empires. And
Oh my God.
he was he was in charge of their business stuff. And, he brokered the deal between Ensemble and Microsoft for Microsoft to buy the studio. And that was like a pretty big deal back in those days. But after that deal was done, he's one of the few people that didn't get to go and get a job at Microsoft afterwards. They were like, yeah, we got this. So he left, and a bunch of developers kind of approached him and were just like, hey, we like what you did there. Can you help us? So he built a practice helping founders of small companies, with the business side of things, right? Because the weird thing about this business is most people get into it because they have a passion about gameplay or animation or coding or whatever. And then, they get the drive to start their own company, and then they realize they have to know things like leases and publishing agreements and equity financing. And so Bob has over the years been that kind of coach, leader, mentor, advisor, helper to help these talented, creative and technical people also make good business decisions. And, we've had, dozens and dozens of clients over the years. So recently, for example, a couple weeks ago, there was a company called Systemera that got bought by Devolver. They make a game called Astroneer. That was a client of ours. Last year we helped Boss Fight Entertainment get sold to Netflix. We helped Spry Fox, Dave Ettery's company, also become a Netflix studio. And we helped another studio called Smoking Gun Interactive become a keyword studio. So, but many of these relationships, that's kind of the end of the end game. But most of these companies, like Systemera, the other partner at the company is a guy named Rise Deckel. He met them 8 years ago at a PAX West when they were 4 people. And he, went with them on a journey for, 8 years, I believe. And, now is able to help them become part of the Devolver family. So that's what we do. We help companies that at any stage, but we can, be there right at the beginning in a lot of cases, and then help them on this journey, take advantage of opportunities, solve problems, expand their networks, develop a strategy, execute on the strategy, and help grow the companies, grow their enterprise value so that they have an opportunity to, become part of a bigger organization and get to do, even more exciting things because they get to be part of a, much larger organization with greater resources. And, we've had a lot of success doing it over the years, and it's really enjoyable work. It's in your blood or it isn't. It's like, I kind of like being in this business is a calling, right? Because if you do it because you think it's a great way to make money, and you can certainly, people can make money and you can make a great living, but it's not an efficient way to make money because you're going to have, it's like you're going to spend, if you average out the amount of hours you spend doing things and what you get paid over time, it's not a good return on investment in terms of the amount of time and all the things you got to learn and all the, you fail more than you win, right? Just like any other entertainment or creative pursuit, right? You're going to have way more heartbreak and setback, but the wins are sweet, and the people that you meet are cool, like, and the imagination that game makers have, and being there, like, when literally I've been parts of projects where I've literally been in the room where a conversation happens and someone floats an idea in a conversation, and then some years later a product ships, right? When you get to be literally part of that, or like there are games out there that have been made that I pitched as like, hey, we should do this. And then someone's like, that's a really good idea. And then the game got made.
Wow.
Right? Like that's happened a few times, right? Yeah. But there have also been like really bad decisions and really colossal failures, and
right.
You don't
all
talk
about
the way,
those as
but
much.
like I wouldn't change it for the world, right? Like it's just I got lucky, and like this, talking about my experience, getting trained in a hard science and then going to USC Film School and learning about creative process. And like the first thing they tell you in your first session at USC when I went there is like writing is rewriting. And like no one had ever told me that before. It's like I'm one of these people who grew up very early on that like if you want to be a story writer, you start at once upon a time and you finish at the end, right? All right, I got to write the beginning to the end, and it's just like, no, you can sometimes start in the middle, or you start at the end, or you start with the kid, and then you're iterating and iterating and iterating, and then you're cutting and iterating. And so like that plus learning, I learned how to program in Fortran because at the time when I was coming up, that was the language of engineering. So engineering, for some reason, used Fortran. So I didn't learn a practical programming language, but I did learn a programming language. And I put stuff on mainframes and, had to wait for things to compile, and dealt with some of that stuff. So that blend of like hard science and engineering and technology, and then the business stuff I learned at film school in addition to the creative stuff, the legal classes, the economics classes, prepared me for the job that I have now, because I have to bridge creativity that also is fueled by technology, right? And then make it work in business, right? And so in retrospect, the training and experiences that I had was perfect. It's just it wasn't architected or designed. It just happened, like I was just stumbling along like, oh, doing this. But because I was curious and I like knowing a lot about, a little bit about a lot of things for what I do, that's really good training, right? Because being able to talk to someone like Harvey, I'm enough, like when he was the head of animation, I'm not a technical animator, but I understood enough about animation and some of the challenges he was having. I could be useful at helping him, network with somebody or help broker the right deal with a motion capture studio, or help him on recruiting, or, and that was my job. I was a resource for him because when he was running the animation department there, he didn't just have to worry about animation. He had a whole bunch of other stuff. So I was there to kind of like help him with the other stuff so that then he could like get some of that stuff put to bed so he could get back to animating, right? Or helping his animators with the act of animating or the pipeline of animating,
I actually that's perfect, Tim. I actually have, like, on the last episode, I think it was the last episode of the episode before that, we talked about the difference between being street smart and being an academic, right? And I think you are the embodiment of that, where, you take a bunch of different knowledge that you gather from a bunch of different things. And I'm pretty sure you even learned things from like parking cars and things
totally.
like that.
I parked Steve Jobs' car multiple times.
See? And you brought it all together in your job. Yeah, no, it's really cool to see because, stories like yours are like super inspiring for people like myself, because it's a reinforcement that even though you think that there's a linear path to a career, sometimes you just have to actually let life tell you what exactly is your vocation. And
I think the thing that saved me more than anything else, if I had to pick one thing, it's curiosity. I'm curious about so many things. Like, I'm curious about people. I'm curious about technology. I'm curious about games. I'm like, my kids the other night, like, I can go deep on like NBA stuff. I know baseball. I know music really deeply from like the late 80s till maybe like the mid 2000s. Like in that span of time, like, I can
This is
throw
true.
down.
We talked about hip hop as well on that dinner.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
wow.
Which is
What?
another thing that's impressive.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%, Kyle. We talked about hip hop, and I was like, man, Team is cool.
Yeah, but any, and before like oldies from my parents, but like, yeah, like the generation gap has definitely hit me because, I like Taylor Swift, but I couldn't name a Taylor Swift song to save my life.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah. So probably I start to drop off a cliff in like, mid 2000s, late 2000s, and, like I get real spotty after that, so.
Yeah. Wow, man, you know the idea usually like in life they always say like you're only using a fraction of your brain power and all that stuff, and I always think about people left brain versus right brain. I feel like just hearing your story, Tim, man, you're using a lot of facets of your brain, like because you just talked about the creative aspect, and I'm more of a creative, and usually that left brain stuff, the more pragmatism, the business stuff is usually I'm so averse to it. But I love the fact that you said you're curious, and which makes sense that you majored in chemistry as science, because scientists, it always boils down to, at least what I know, curiosity, and I think that's just so cool, man.
Well, the cool thing is like it's. I always thought like, oh, I'm good at math and science. I'm not so good at like humanities or arts, so I'm not that creative. And then it wasn't until I got to college that started to change for me. And it was I can remember because I was curious, I took an expository writing course, the most boring form of writing, right? And I had this really great teacher, and it was also the first time I ever got to use a word processor. So all of a sudden, what I discovered was the big barrier to writing for me was that I was lazy. I didn't like retyping pages. I didn't like rewriting pages, like my hand, but when I suddenly got to use WordPerfect on a PC or like, Mac Write on Mac Classics at the library at Rutgers, all of a sudden I loved writing, because all of a sudden like I could like fix things and rewrite. And I got into this expository writing class, and this teacher, I can't remember her name. She was just wonderful. We would do all this reading, and then we'd have to write these like, compare and contrast or analyses of what we read, or explain things to the class or whatever. And then all of a sudden, like she was calling out my stuff and like having me read what I wrote to the class, and she was really encouraging, right? And it just kind of pushed me. And then when I got the opportunity, like, well, I'd never, other than like when I was in grammar school, I'd never written anything creative. And then with the screenwriting course, I remember I was like staying up late with the, the people on my dorm room floor, right? And I was like, oh, should I really try this? Because I was kind of scared, I'd never done anything. And like, you have to like write something creative, and then everyone else has got to workshop it and tell you what they like and don't like. And like, I was all scared, and they're like, no, man, you got to do this. And it was great. It's just like, it opened a new door for me, and I fortunately had people who were encouraging me to take that leap, and getting that experience of like grappling with creative stuff and like having to create and like do something original. Like to graduate from USC Film School at the time, you had to write an original screenplay as a thesis, and then that had to be submitted to a panel, and that's what determined whether you graduated or not. That was like really scary for me. Just finishing a screenplay, from start to finish, So
was it a full length too, or like how many pages?
Feature length.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, feature length.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was all great training for me. Great training. And, I learned so much. The other thing I did is that I just love making films that, we had to do a lot of filmmaking. We'd shoot with video cameras, but like I literally volunteered to be whatever anyone needed on any set. So I didn't just do my stuff. I was on the
gaffing
for like everybody. Yeah. Okay. I did lighting. I did camera
Audio
work. I did, whatever people needed. So I worked on like dozens and dozens and dozens of projects. And it was just,
Nice.
again, great experience for me.
The
And that's
curiosity.
the curiosity. I found all
Yeah.
aspects of filmmaking interesting. So I did everything I could.
Awesome. Harvey, I don't know if you all had anything else you wanted to ask, but I was going to ask like pretty much what I usually always finish off as far as my last question to Tim, if that's okay. No. Go ahead.
One thing, and this is mainly to do with the relationship that Tim and I have had after working together, built a Rocket Boy, because of Proxima and all that stuff. Tim, so for anybody out there, just like myself, that actually wants to actually start their own, games studio and all that stuff. As we talked here, there comes a time that you actually need help, because this is not, no matter how much you think that you can do this by yourself, you need help, right? So what kind of advice would you give them from the perspective of where you sit on when and how should they come to a place like Strategic Alternatives for help?
Well, I mean, what we do is we help business owners. So anyone who wants to start a company, that's kind of where we get involved. So we can get involved with people when they've already started their company and they're running and going, or they're thinking about starting a company. That's what we really specialize in. So, they can come to us and, at almost any stage. Like, I'm happy to talk to somebody, like, if they're just thinking about starting a company and they want to know, like, what's involved, what are some of the first things you got to do. Like, it's funny, I was talking to, I won't name names, but a studio contacted me because they're currently an internal studio, and they're with a publisher that, it's a bit challenging, and they need to, start up new somewhere else, right? And we're looking at the different paths, and he was asking me my advice, and just when I talked to him about what he wanted to do, it's like, it didn't really sound like he was up for like being this like independent studio entrepreneur raising money. He just wasn't that kind of guy. So really he's not up for that particular part of the journey. So we need to pursue a different strategy than that, because he just wants to make games. He doesn't want to have to do all those other things, like, for example, that you're having to grapple with Proxima, Harvey. He's not up for that journey. And there's more than one way to, get to where you're going. So we have to like explore different avenues and different options. So that's part of my job, is like when people say, oh, I have this vision, right? This is what I want to achieve. This is where I want to be, helping them understand, well, these are the different strategies that you could employ that will give you a chance to achieve that vision. And here's what's involved with each of those different pathways, right? Because like going for equity financing or publisher financing, or starting out, as an internal studio, as an employee, as part of an organization, all have different pros and cons and different hurdles and opportunities and challenges. So my job is to help people understand all those options and what's involved and what they're going to have to do and have to be up for, so they can make an informed choice that fits with who they are, right?
Exactly. And this is gonna sound like an ad, but I genuinely mean this, because Tim has helped us so much behind the scenes. But genuinely, like, this business is much more vast than even I thought as a developer of 20 plus years. There's many spinning plates. And if you are a developer with experience or no experience, and you just want to go into making a game in a studio, and you just think that it's about making games, unfortunately, it's not that simple. So what Tim has done for me, specifically for us at Proxima, is highlight some of the things, like the blind spots, right? The things that we don't see, the things that we should expect, the things that we might not see coming. And he does this in a really good way, because he's very thorough and direct, but not in a way that kind of scares you away anyways, right?
Man, what a journey. And the last thing I usually have asked on this show, the 3 episodes we've done prior to this, I say, in another world, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, Tim, you would be you fill in the blank. And I had some suspicions about what you could say based on the last all we talked about.
I mean, my latest passion, as people could see, is the thing I do as my hobby is I love to sing and play music.
Okay.
And when I was younger, I had the good fortune. Like one of the things my high school was really, really good at was band. We had a great band, and I was in marching band and jazz band and concert band and orchestra. Like I was in every flavor of band you could be in. I was a horn player, and I got quite good. And we had our band director was this guy named Daryl Bott. He was one of the most inspirational human beings I've ever met in my entire life. And he just recently passed away. And he had such a profound influence on me, both as a human being and a love of music, but also just learning to like try to go do things that are hard, and it's okay to fail, but just get up and keep doing it. Put everything you got into it, like he was a father figure for me. My parents were divorced when I was really young. So it just really influenced me. And, like I sold my horn in college just because my lifestyle didn't allow me to be part of like an orchestra or whatever. And I always wanted to get back into it. And one year I got guitar lessons as a Christmas gift at a community college when I was living in Palo Alto. And I took these guitar lessons, and then I just slowly started getting into it. So I love like playing guitar, singing, and recording the music, and just trying to get better, try to get better at guitar playing, better at singing, better at recording, better at mixing, better at mastering, better at, picking different sound effects and stuff. Like it's all really cool, what you do on a very amateur level, so it's if I could do that, like as a fantasy, and I was good at it, like that would be amazing, but I know I'm not good enough for that to be a professional calling. So,
well, first off, I mean, the audio team here is pretty, it's just me and Johnny. So who knows? I'm serious. You never know.
Team is the next.
But also too, just because most people never pick like what I do in audio as like to follow, for follow up and fill out that question. I'm curious, what DAW do you use? What do you use? You use Pro Tools because you mentioned Media Composer. Are you staying in Avid?
I use Ableton, but
Okay.
I only use Ableton just because I got a Focusrite Scarlett, and Ableton came with it, so I started with that. But I got a buddy of mine. I was in a band for a while with this buddy of mine, Laddie Irvin. He's one of the most talented musicians I know, and he's trying to get me to. He says PreSonus Studio One is the shit. So he's like, you got to be doing that, man. And I'm like, I feel just so like I've stuck with Ableton. I've watched so much Ableton's tutorials.
Yeah.
Like I just know it. Like now I'm sort of like, oh, really? Can I shift at this point? I got to move all my loops over to PreSonus. Like.
I think for you, and I mean this, I'll wrap it up because I don't want to get into audio tech world because that's a whole nother podcast for me. But I would say if you are looking, Ableton is great. I mean, let's be honest. Like, and as a person who's worked in Pro Tools pretty much my whole professional life, and only because I learned it in college 20 some years ago, I would think that if you did want to explore another DAW, go to Bitwig. It's the people who made Ableton made it, and it's like Ableton on another, like meets what is the open source that people always use, Linux. It's like Linux in that sense. It's like very like whatever you want to do that Ableton can. Ableton can pretty much do everything with Max for Live and all that stuff. Bitwig is that on another level. It's just no one really talks about it as much. So,
okay, cool.
Yeah, but anyway, I love to stay in touch and just hear your musical offerings, man. Like it's
the thing that I'm really loving right now is I was talking to somebody else. I was looking at a game demo today from a team that I might end up working with, and it has a real audio will be like really, really important for this. And I was talking about like the thing that I'm really appreciating from audio engineers, because it's fascinating to me. I'm not very good at it, but like listening to things and figuring out where they are in the mix spatially in your mind, where you're listening to a sound. I'm like, ooh, I want the drums to be more. It's like my mind goes to this very strange place where I'm trying to visualize something that I'm hearing, like, ooh, yeah, the drums need to be more forward or backward or left, right, panning into my head. Like, I love when I'm getting into that and what it's doing with my brain. it's really and it's weird when you slip into that pocket, and I can like, I'm getting older, so my hearing isn't as great as it used to be. But when I get into that zone and I'm like, yeah, I really hear it over here now. That's weird. Like
it's a great time for audio. Cool. It is a great time for audio with spatial, Dolby, and immersive stuff. Because audio for a long time was just relegated to left and right. Now the stereo image is just, it's 3D now, 4D in a lot of ways.
Cool.
So anyway.
I love it.
Well, man, thank you, Tim, for coming on the show. And I mean, really, I guess if I had to do a summation of what I've learned, because every episode for me on this show, like I glean something especially from, whoever I'm talking to. And I feel like with you, the overarching and kind of consistent thread through this is just be curious, because it's led you to have a pretty successful situation in whatever you do, from ballet to chemistry to film school to working in games. And you genuinely just seem happy because of the fact that you've never strayed away from that through line of being curious. And I think that's awesome, because a lot of times I know people, if they're not in the part of the story, they think they get, kind of jaded, and they're, this wasn't for me or whatever. But I feel like if you just keep that soft skill, so to speak, of just like staying curious, which can be applicable to so many things, that can carry you through the toughest of times and the lowest of lows, and just kind of keep you even keeled. So thank you
I
for
totally
for
agree.
coming on.
Like I've been, so many people have helped me in my life, and it's like when I met them, I didn't realize how much they could help me, you know what I mean? But because I was curious and able to build a relationship, then things have happened to me, and then people have been there to help me, and I think that's what's kind of saved me. It's been great, and I'm really grateful for all the people that have helped me throughout my life and my career.
Awesome. Well, as I always say, we love playing games as much as we love making them, and we do the show for the players. My name is Kyle K. Murdoch on behalf of Harvey and our guest Tim. We'll see y'all next time. Peace.